Okay, let's get painting. So I'm just working on the underpainting for this piece. Still chipping away at it. I'm in Brisbane right now, and apparently there's like a cyclone on the way, which, I don't know, it doesn't really look like there's a cyclone outside, but it is pretty cloudy. I don't mind, it's just more reason to stay indoors and paint, really, so works for me. Right, now, so yeah, I'm just filling in these figures right now, just using a bit of burnt sienna. I'm just using this brush right here, this angle brush, and just filling in some of the shadow shapes, detailing some of the faces, and yeah, just refining the overall drawing. I'm just deciding right now what I want to do. And I've also got this brush, which is pretty worn out, to be honest. It's very, the bristles are kind of a bit dead, but that's fine because, you know, we're not doing anything too refined here. I'm just using a combination of burnt sienna and titanium white. I'm just going to grab a bit more white on my palette. Okay, off we go. So I think I want to just really start detailing in this shield here, and maybe the one behind it. So whenever you're trying to simplify a drawing, you just kind of want to focus more on the basic planes, and I'm kind of focusing more on where the light is likely to hit the figures. So the light source is coming from directly above, so this is like a scene in like midday or something. Obviously it's going to be a lot clearer when the painting's finished. You'll be able to see exactly what's going on. But I'm envisioning that the light source is coming from above, and that should help simplify the process a little bit, because basically all the shadows on the figures and all the objects are going to be casted directly downwards. So on these shields, I'm placing highlights on top of the forms where the light is likely to hit. And then you can just see I'm scrubbing my brush into that part there. Just kind of really scrubbing in the paint, because I don't want the paint to be too thick. I just want to have it laid on pretty thinly. I'm only using a tiny amount of mineral spirit. It's mostly oil paint at this stage, because especially in these highlights where I want them to be a little bit thicker. That was the eraser. Whoops. And that's, I'm not really scrubbing in that well, so I need to grab a bit more paint. I'm using titanium white, which I'm not trying to use too much of it because the problem with titanium white is how thick it is. It tends to get very white very quickly, as you can see. I don't really want that kind of level of brightness, at least not for this part. So I'm really just trying to scrub it into the canvas. And I'm kind of leaving out the areas that I think will be in shadow. So this, you can see like this spherical form would actually be casting a shadow on the shield. You can see I've done the same thing on this figure here. See, he's got his shield in front of him. You can kind of see the indication of the highlights. And in this gray area, which I've just kind of left blank, that's basically all the areas in darkness. So it's kind of how I'm painting this. So it's pretty simple. When you simplify it like that, and you're just focusing on light and shadow over everything else, and not worrying about detail so much, you'll actually come to a somewhat realistic result. I mean, it's not going to be fully realistic because we've got a very long way to go before these figures start looking really 3D. But you know, your underpainting should be the just the general foundation for what you want, especially when it comes to lights and shadows, which I think are very important. I think they're very important for describing the form. So if I can kind of just figure out where my lights and my shadows and reflections and things are going to be during the underpainting stage, then that'll just make putting color on top of that much easier. But at the same time, I don't really want to do like a full-on detailed rendering at this stage. I just want to figure out where things are kind of going, that's all. So I've got some brighter highlights on that spherical form on the shield. Now I can just kind of just gently scrub some more paint in. That's way too bright. If it gets too bright, don't be afraid to just get your finger in there and just rub it out. You can also use an eraser, which I just dropped on the floor, so I'm just going to grab that. There we go. Okay. So you can go in with the eraser a little bit. And just kind of clean it up a little. And that's probably all I need to do for that form, at least right now. I don't really need to do a whole bunch. I do need to render the other forms though. Oh, see again, too bright. That's kind of titanium white for you. It's very strong. And you know, remember that when you're working on a painting, you always have to remember that contrast is going to draw the viewer's eye. So you have to think in terms of where is the most contrast going to be and where is there going to be less contrast. So, you know, again, like these figures in the background, for example, they don't have as much contrast as these guys in the foreground. Like the shadows are darker on these figures here and the highlights are brighter. And again, you can work that out during the underpainting stage. You can figure all this stuff out before you throw color on it. This stage is really all about just kind of organizing your values and just constructing the image in that sense, so that when the time does come to throw color on it, you're not going to be lost. But yeah, you always have to remember that rule is contrast will actually draw attention to certain things in your painting. So you're not really painting necessarily what looks realistic. You're always designing. You're always choosing things very carefully. It's like, like this figure right here in the background, I actually put a bit of contrast on him, like on his helmet. You can see like his shield is sort of highlighted here as well. Although it's kind of a little bit faded out because I don't want it to compete with these figures in the foreground too much. I think that would look a bit messy. But he's got a bit of contrast on his face, like, you can kind of see the facial details, and these highlights are quite bright. So your eye is kind of drawn to him, and he's kind of looking up at, this is going to be like that Roman eagle, which, these guys, can't remember the name, but they carry the eagle, so his eye goes up here. Then there'll be like some eagles around here and flags and things, which leads your eye all the way back to here. So it's kind of like I'm trying to design the composition in a way where your eye kind of goes around in a circle basically, and that kind of keeps you locked into the composition. But it's contrast that does most of that work. So you don't want to make everything super contrasty. You want to pick certain things out so that you can design the composition in a better way. You don't want to just make everything look super realistic, because then it just looks a bit too detailed and it looks kind of chaotic and messy, and the audience doesn't really know what to look at. As a painter, if you have a look at the old masters paintings, they're actually designing the composition in such a way that they're directing your eye to what they want you to look at, and then everything else in the background is kind of like support. So that's kind of what I'm trying to do here. I'm trying to make these background characters sort of fade out. Like there's some indications of faces and helmets here, but they're pretty abstract and they don't really look like much of anything at all. But that's kind of good. That's what I want. I don't want too much contrast in that area, because I don't really want you looking at what's going on in the background here. All I need is the illusion that there's like a legion in the far off distance, which kind of looks like a whole army of people. That's kind of the effect that we're going for. So hopefully that makes sense. I do ramble on a bit. I've got a bad habit for that, but anyway. I also want to kind of direct your eye to this centurion as well. So let's maybe put like a highlight on his helmet. Again, that's a bit too bright. Like, I want it to be bright, but I don't want it to compete with this. It's all about creating a hierarchy. And I think the highlight shapes should be a bit on the smaller side for this character in the distance. He shouldn't, like these guys have got a lot of highlights, but the highlights that I paint on this guy should be done pretty carefully, I think. Again, if it gets too bright, I can just rub my finger on it. There's no problem. I think lead white was used by the old masters when they were doing their underpaintings. Not by all of them, obviously, but lead white, I think, was the paint that they had, and I think it had a more kind of transparent quality to it from what I understand, which is why they were able to build these very soft gradations of value. It's quite hard to do that with titanium white. Like, as you can see, titanium it really just wants to go fully bright. But, you know, it's pretty easy. I just rub my finger on it and that kind of sorts the problem out. And the brown paint, the burnt sienna, is like, it's already dry, so I don't have to worry about wiping any of that off. I can just paint my highlights right on top of it. He's got some of these ornamental details on his chest. There's one here too. So this is kind of where I start. I'm not trying to make things too detailed. I'm just trying to, I guess, clean up the forms a lot more so that we know exactly what we're looking at. You can see how some of my figures, especially here, are quite sketchy. And again, I don't mind that sketchiness for anything in the background, but anything in the foreground needs to be, it needs to be kind of fleshed out a bit more, just so that it reads a little bit better. But again, it's safer to do that in this underpainting stage. I don't want to, don't really want to do it when I'm coloring in, because then you're kind of thinking of too many things at once. Still got to fix this guy in the end, and I've got to draw this guy in. I've kind of sketched him in with a bit of charcoal, so that's another thing that I do in the underpainting stage. Like, if there's anything that I'm unsure about, I'll just draw him with charcoal first, and then I'll go over him with oil paint. It's just a bit safer that way. But, you know, if I've got a clear idea for a figure, you know, how he's going to be posed, how, you know, what he's going to look like, then, yeah, I can just go straight in with the oil paint. But I don't know, I'm not really happy with what this is, so I might change that. I might try and push some figures a bit further back into the distance so it doesn't look too cluttered here. And I think by pushing this figure further away into the distance, it'll just create a bit more of a depth to the painting. So I think I should probably try doing that. But again, I'll figure that out with charcoal, and then once I'm happy, I will go over it with oil paint.